Truth inside a pack was never a simple ledger of what happened and what did not. Truth bent beneath rank, beneath fear, beneath the hunger to punish someone quickly so grief could feel contained. Arabella Ravencrest had learned that as a healer when she was still young enough to think skill could shield her, that clean hands and careful records meant safety. In Moonhall Infirmary, with Feverleaf crushed green under her knees and Iron Tang flooding the back of her throat, she learned the harder law. When a body failed in public, the pack would rather burn a healer than face the rot in its own house. She knelt on stone slick with spilled tonic and birth water, palms shaking so hard she could not close her fingers. The Luna lay behind a privacy screen while two midwives murmured prayers in broken rhythm, and around Arabella the chamber rang with voices that kept rising, colliding, sharpening. "You touched her tea. You were alone with her satchel. She started bleeding after your draft." Arabella tried to answer and tasted bitterness, fever-leaf dust clinging to her tongue. "I was called after the cramping began. I wrote the hour in the slate log. Check it." No one moved to check. A guard kicked the slate board toward the wall and it cracked in two. The Luna's sister stepped close enough that Arabella smelled cedar smoke and rage. "Do not hide behind healer words. My sister has lost her child." The words struck harder than the shove that followed. Arabella rocked back, caught herself on blistered hands, and forced air into lungs that refused steadiness. She had seen the loss. She had held cloth and hot water and trembling wrists. The tiny stillness had already come before she arrived, and she had known it by silence alone. Still, shame climbed her throat because grief in that room needed a culprit, and she was young, low-ranked, and kneeling. Then, Fenris Windrider entered with the solemn face of a diplomat and the timing of a blade. He wore treaty gray, unarmed by custom, flanked by two council escorts who parted the crowd for him as if he carried moonlight in his hands. He paused beside the midwives, lowered his head, and let everyone witness his sorrow. When he turned toward Arabella, his gaze held polished pity. "This is a dark night for all packs," he said, voice carrying easily over the noise. "I ask to observe only to support Moonhall in grief. Yet I am told Wolfsbane traces were found on the lost infant's tongue." A hush dropped so fast Arabella heard her own pulse in her ears. Fenris continued, each word measured. "Wolfsbane in a healer's chamber is no accident. Under treaty law, that warrants trial by moonfire before dawn." Arabella stared at him, stunned first by the accusation, then by the precision. Not council inquiry, not herb analysis. Moonfire, immediate judgment. A healer marked by Wolfsbane evidence would not survive the hour once the circle was lit. "That is madness," she said, pushing herself up to her knees again. "Wolfsbane is sealed in black iron in the toxics room. I do not even hold that key." Fenris gave a grave nod, as if rewarding honesty. "Then you will welcome the trial." He stepped aside. A junior midwife, crying so hard she hiccuped between breaths, held out a folded cloth with tweezers. On the inner linen lay yellow residue and a snapped herb tag from Arabella's satchel. Her own handwriting marked the string. Fever leaf. Evening ration. Arabella's stomach dropped with cold clarity. Feverleaf and Wolfsbane did not store together. Not ever. Not by accident. Someone had placed that tag there. She opened her mouth and caught herself because every protest now sounded like strategy, and the room had already chosen what to believe. The council elder arrived with two enforcers and no ceremony. "Arabella Ravencrest, healer apprentice of Moonhall, you are stripped pending Moonfire judgment." He ripped the bronze healer sigil from her collar. The pin tore skin at her throat. Warm wetness slid down her neck, and nobody reached for cloth. Inside her, thought narrowed to a single hard thread. This is not grief. This is arranged. For one terrible stretch she did not move. She watched hands she had bandaged point at her. She watched patients she had sat with through fever turn their faces away. She watched Fenris bow his head again, respectful and untouched, while the chamber filled with calls for fire. If she stayed, they would burn her before the moon crossed the roofline. By the time the bells marked second watch, they had changed the sentence from moonfire to conditional exile, citing Treaty Week and outside witnesses. The council framed it as mercy. Arabella heard the practical truth in the guard captain's mutter. Burning a healer publicly while guests were in the hall might split alliances too soon. They marched her through the lower corridor with her wrists bound in silver thread cord that abraded skin every time she stumbled. Pack members lined the passage in layered silence, broken only by occasional spit and the scrape of boots. One old wolf she had treated for a winter lung coughed and looked straight through her. At the outer gate, rain began, fine and needling. Torches hissed, throwing smoke low across the yard. A clerk read terms of exile she barely heard, each clause another stone tied to her name. No practice within Moonhall lands, no claim to pack protection, no hearing for one full turning of the moon. She swayed as the cold hit her sweat-damp clothes. Wolfsbane exposure from the infirmary evidence room lingered in her body. She had handled contaminated linen before anyone warned her, and now tremors came in waves from forearms to jaw. She clenched her teeth until the shaking eased. I am not guilty. I am not clean either, not after what touched my skin. If I walk out that gate and collapse, they will call it justice. If I keep walking, I might still name what happened. I need distance, shelter, and one witness who is not owned by Moonhall Council. I need someone who does not flinch from ugly truth. I need to live long enough for proof to matter. Keep breathing. Count 4 in, 6 out. Do not give them your fear where they can use it. Do not beg. Do not break here, in front of Fenris, while he watches like a man admiring his own careful work. A sharp voice cut through rain. Move her. The guard line shifted. Fenris stood under the gate arch with a hood drawn back, droplets silvering his hair. He should not have been there for an exile handoff. Yet he came close, as if to offer final condolence, and murmured so only she could hear. Some bonds rot from poison before they ever form. He stepped away before she could answer, expression untouched. But she had caught it then, beneath wet wool and torch smoke, bitter metal and crushed root, the same wrong scent that had clung to the cloth in the infirmary. Not a healer's chamber smell, a tincture smell, fresh. Her breath locked. The crux was suddenly plain. This was never about one loss in one room. This was preparation. One enforcer shoved her toward the postern path that led down to Exile Road. Another tightened grip on her arm hard enough to bruise. Walk straight until dawn. If you turn back, we spear you. They expected compliance from cold and shame. They expected collapse by morning. Arabella gave them 5 measured steps into rain. On the 6th, she let her knees buckle as if the tremor had won. The enforcer cursed and bent to haul her upright. She twisted, slammed her shoulder into his thigh, and grabbed the torch bracket from the wall. Hot pitch spilled and flared at their boots. Horses screamed. Smoke billowed thick and black between gate pillars. She ran, not down Exile Road, across the drainage ditch, through thorn hedge, into the old mill track nobody patrolled because wolves hated the Rotwater marsh beside it. Brambles tore her sleeves. Mud dragged at her boots. Behind her, shouts split into 3 directions, confused by smoke and rain and the sudden dark when the gate torches failed. She kept low, using healer memory of terrain from herb runs years before dawn. Left at the split cedar. Over the stone culvert with the broken lip. Do not follow stream bed where scent pools. Cut uphill where wind strips it clean. By the time the moon climbed above the cloud break, she had reached the ridge path overlooking abandoned borderlands, chest burning, wrists raw, legs numb from cold. The shaking returned harder, teeth rattling. She crouched behind a fallen pine and pressed her forehead to bark until the wave passed. Only one destination remained that made any strategic sense and any emotional sense at all. The old border fortress, half ruin and half legend, where Theron Ashford had vanished from Council Reach years ago. Some called him Oathbreaker. Some called him the only alpha alive who refused to kneel to rotten law. Prophecy named him savior or ruin, depending on who told it. Arabella rose on unsteady legs and turned toward the black outline of distant battlements. If Moonhall wanted her erased before dawn, she would arrive at the one door they feared she might reach. The ridge wind hit her wet clothes like cold teeth, and Arabella forced one foot in front of the other down the far slope, sliding through pine needles and shale until the trees thickened enough to hide her from Moonhall torches. Fear had stopped being sharp and become structural, a frame around every thought. Where to place her weight, where scent would carry, where patrols might cut across the old border paths before dawn. Twice she had to brace against trunks while tremors moved through her shoulders and jaw in hard, humiliating waves. The Wolfsbane residue on her skin had sunk deeper than she wanted to admit. The fortress appeared by degrees, not as a single silhouette, but as angles of black stone emerging from cloud and cliff. The outer wall had been cut directly into the mountain, ancient blocks fused with newer reinforcement, wolf-head gargoyles worn smooth by years of weather. No banner flew from the highest tower. No ceremonial fire burned on the battlements. It looked less like a lord's seat and more like a place built for refusal. She reached the first ward line as the rain thinned to mist. Slate markers, each carved with old runes, stood half-buried in moss. When she crossed between them, heat prickled under her skin. Then a low pressure settled behind her eyes, as if the fortress itself had taken her measure and not yet decided what to do with her. She swallowed, lifted empty hands, and kept walking. A shape dropped from the wall above and landed without sound. Then a second. Border sentries, both in dark leathers with fur at the collar, both carrying short spears tipped in silver. Their faces remained hooded, but their stances were precise and disciplined, not the performative aggression she had known at Moonhall's gate. "Name," the taller one said. "Arabella Ravencrest, healer apprentice of Moonhall." Her voice cracked on the second sentence. "Exiled tonight. Falsely accused." The shorter sentry circled once, scenting her, and went still at whatever she found. Wolfsbane contamination. Handled planted evidence in the infirmary. Arabella kept her palms open despite the sting in her wrists. "I need sanctuary. I need a hearing that is not bought." The tall sentry's head tilted. "You crossed marked stone uninvited into Ashford territory and asked for the one thing we do not give lightly." "I know." "Why come here?" "Because everyone else was easier to bend," she thought, but what came out was rougher and truer. "Because I need one alpha who hates convenient lies more than he hates scandal." Silence held. Mist beaded on spearheads. Somewhere above them, chains groaned in the wind. The shorter sentry stepped closer and caught Arabella's chin, turning her face toward the faint light. Her fingers paused at the torn skin on Arabella's throat, where the healer sigil had been ripped free. "Moonhall did this publicly." "Yes." "You ran anyway." "I am still running." For a moment, Arabella expected the spear point to nudge her back downslope. Instead, the tall sentry jerked his head toward the inner gate. "You walk in front, slow. If you reach for herb blades or hidden steel, we put you down." "I have no steel left." "Not what I asked." Arabella nodded once. "Then no." They moved through a narrow entry cut between walls thick enough to swallow torchlight. The passage bent twice, defensive design old as clan wars, and opened into an interior courtyard where training rings sat empty under rain sheen. She smelled banked coals, wet wool, oil stone, and the clean iron scent of weapons recently maintained. Wolves watched from covered walkways, not jeering, not welcoming, assessing. By the time they reached the keep stairs, her knees had started to soften again. She hated that her body advertised weakness so clearly. At the fifth step, she missed footing and pitched forward. The shorter sentry caught her elbow before she struck stone and did not comment, which felt kinder than pity. Inside, warmth from deep hearths made the tremors worse for a minute, then better. They passed a long hall lined with maps and old battle standards, then turned into a lower corridor where the ceiling dropped, and the air smelled of leather, metal, and cedar smoke. "Armory," the tall sentry said. "He is there." Her heart gave one hard, disorienting beat. She had pictured Theron Ashford as rumor-made flesh, ruthless, scarred, half-feral with prophecy and old blood. She had not expected the sudden, almost childish flare of hope under the fear. Hope was dangerous. Hope made people predictable. "I am shaking. Keep your voice level. Do not plead too soon. Do not confess everything in a spill and call it honesty. Lead with facts. The tincture scent. The false timing. The snapped herb tag. If he asks why you should be trusted, tell him this. I came here because you are harder to manipulate than men who call themselves civilized. If he laughs, leave before they lock the gate. If he believes me, stay alive long enough to prove it. Breathe. Shoulders back. You are a healer even without a sigil. You are not the story they wrote for you." The tall sentry pushed open the armory door. Lamps burned low along stone walls lined with swords, axes, and racks of spears. Rain tapped faintly through a slit window. At a central table stood a man in a dark tunic with forearms bare, one hand braced on a map weighted by a dagger. He looked up as they entered. Theron Ashford was larger than she had imagined, not merely tall but densely built, like the walls around him had shaped themselves to match him. A pale scar crossed his left brow and disappeared into his hairline. Another marked his throat where a blade might once have tried for certainty and failed. His face held no court polish, only attention sharpened by years of surviving bad news. His gaze moved over her in one sweep. Torn sleeves, bound wrists, exposed throat, tremor she could not hide. Nothing in his expression softened, yet he dismissed the sentries with 2 fingers and waited until the door shut. "Moonhall exile reaches my door in the middle of Treaty Week," he said. His voice was low, controlled, carrying fatigue like banked fire. "Tell me why that is my problem." Arabella stepped forward, meaning to place her satchel on the table, and her boot slid on rainwater she had tracked in. She caught herself by grabbing the nearest weapon rack. Pain sliced bright across her palm. A silvered short blade, honed thin, had stood edge out. Her skin parted cleanly. The blood hit the stone in 3 quick drops. Theron inhaled like a man struck. The scent that rose between them was metallic and warm, threaded with winter jasmine so vivid it startled her own senses. The room narrowed, sound thinned to heartbeat and breath. Heat flared under her sternum and climbed her throat in a rush that made her fingers go numb. Awareness prickled along her spine. Every instinct in her body snapped alert toward him. His pupils widened, then tightened. Amber bled into his irises, brightening with a predator's focus that was not hunger alone. His shoulders locked. One hand gripped the edge of the table so hard wood creaked. "No," he said, but the word sounded torn from somewhere deeper than denial. "No, not now." Arabella pressed her cut hand against her sleeve, but the blood kept seeping. The pull in her chest intensified. Not pain exactly, not relief, but a force trying to align her bones toward him. She had treated mated pairs before. She knew the signs in theory, in textbook language and old priestess notes. Nothing in those pages had prepared her for this magnitude, this terrifying rightness arriving at the worst possible hour. Theron took one step back, as if distance could undo what had already ignited. The air around him changed density. Power rolled from him in a controlled wave that made the lamp flames shudder. He kept his eyes on her hand, then dragged them to her face with visible effort. "Who are you?" he asked, "and why does your blood smell like a promise I never made?" She laughed once, breathless and almost angry. "Arabella Ravencrest, accused poisoner, disgraced healer. Apparently your worst timing." His jaw flexed. "Do not joke. If I do not, I might fall over." He looked at her again, and this time she saw it. Fear, swift and private, almost more startling than the feral edge in his gaze. Not fear of her. Fear of what she represented. Of prophecy, perhaps. Of losing choice. The bond tugged harder, a bright thread running sternum to sternum. She could hear his heartbeat now, heavy and uneven beneath disciplined stillness. Her own answered in staccato bursts. "Stay where you are," he said. "I am trying." "Do not come closer." "I wasn't planning to." The lie failed halfway through the sentence. Every cell in her body wanted to close the space. Shame followed fast on its heels because the accusations from Moonhall still clung like ash. If he touched her, if scent and bond carried memory deeper, he would eventually learn the charge tied to her name. He might believe her innocence. He might not. Rejection after recognition was said to break wolves for years. Theron moved first, not toward her, but to a basin near the wall. He poured clean water, grabbed a strip of linen, then stopped with cloth in his hand, breathing through clenched teeth as if arguing with himself. When he returned, he halted a careful arm's length away and held out the linen rather than taking her wrist. "Wrap it." Arabella stared at the cloth, then at him. "You are afraid to touch me." "I am afraid of what follows if I do." The honesty landed like another cut, precise and undeniable. She took the linen and bound her palm one-handed, clumsy from shaking. He watched every motion, attention fierce but restrained. Outside the armory door, footsteps approached, hesitated, retreated, as if those beyond had felt the charge in the room and chosen caution. Theron spoke without looking away. "I have spent years refusing chains dressed as destiny. I will not be trapped by a bond delivered through blood on my floor." Arabella tied the knot with her teeth and lifted her chin. "Then do not be trapped. Hear me first. I came with evidence, not seduction." That pulled a rough sound from him, nearly a laugh and not kind. "You think this feels like seduction? It feels like falling off a cliff while someone names constellations." Against reason, against fear, his mouth twitched. The moment was small, absurd, and painfully human. Then the amber in his eyes deepened again, ancient and intent, and the world contracted to that line between them. He took one measured step closer, close enough that she felt his heat, close enough to count the silver threads in the scar along his throat. Locked in that gaze, Arabella understood two truths at once. She had found the only wolf powerful enough to shield her from the lie hunting her, and the same wolf could destroy what remained of her if he decided her name was too stained to keep. The decision was taken from both of them when her knees failed. Not dramatic, not graceful, just a sudden collapse of muscle and heat, as if someone had quietly removed the hinges from her body. She caught the table edge with her uninjured hand, missed, and folded toward the stone. Theron crossed the distance in a blur and stopped himself an inch before grabbing her. The restraint was visible, almost violent in its precision. His hands hovered at her shoulders, fingers flexing. Then he shifted and caught only her forearm through the linen of her sleeve, careful skin to cloth, no direct claim. "Sit," he said, voice roughened by effort. She sank onto a low bench near the weapons racks and pressed her bound palm between her knees. The tremor that followed rolled through her in hard waves, jaw to spine, then back again. the Wolfsbane contamination in her blood finding every weak seam. Her teeth clicked. She hated the sound. Theron did not call guards. He did not bark orders. He moved with clipped efficiency to the hearth niche, took a kettle from the coals, and returned with water, clean cloth, and a dark glass vial she recognized by scent before she saw the label. Ghost Moss Salve. Anti-inflammatory. Expensive. He knelt to set the basin down, then paused as if kneeling itself was unfamiliar. I can bring one of my healers. I am a healer. You are shaking hard enough to dislocate your own wrist if you keep clenching that hand. Her laugh came out broken. Not my proudest professional moment. For the first time, something gentler crossed his face. Not softness exactly, but understanding sharpened by old memory. No, probably not. Another tremor hit. She folded forward, arms wrapped around herself, and for one dangerous beat she felt his aura surge, a protective force pushing against stone, torch fire, air. He forced it down. Then he took off his cloak and laid it around her shoulders without touching her neck. The fabric was heavy, lined in dense winter fur and smelling of cedar smoke, steel, and rain. Heat settled over her like a command her body obeyed before her mind could object. He sat on the floor in front of her, back against a pillar, legs braced, making himself lower instead of looming above. It was such a deliberate choice that it took her a moment to understand its mercy. Look at me, he said. She lifted her gaze. Breathe on count. 4 in, 6 out. I will count with you. He did. Voice low and steady, never hurried, never pitying. By the 5th cycle, the shaking eased from violent to manageable. By the 9th, she could unclench her jaw. I am in a warlord's armory, wrapped in his cloak, listening to him count my breaths like this is ordinary. I should not trust this. I should catalog leverage points, exits, the nearest blade. Yet he is not pressing, not scenting my throat, not asking for a debt I cannot pay. Stay awake. Stay sharp. You need facts, not fantasy. But this floor is warm under my boots, and no one has called me murderer for 6 full minutes, and his voice is doing that impossible thing calm voices do when they are real instead of performed. It gives my body permission to stand down. If this is strategy, it is the strangest one I have ever seen. If it is kindness, I do not know where to put it. When her breathing steadied, he held out his hand. May I see the cut? The question stunned her more than the bond pull had. May I? Not give me your hand. Not hold still. She nodded and passed him her injured palm. He unwound the linen, expression tightening at the depth of the slice, and the silver irritation already rising around the edges. Blade was silvered. You are reacting. Old sensitivity. Worse with Wolfsbane in my system. Who tied your wrists that tight? Moon Hall enforcers. A muscle jumped in his jaw. He washed the wound with warm water, movements controlled to the point of reverence, then smoothed ghost moss salve over the angry skin. His fingers were calloused and unexpectedly gentle. When he reached for her other hand to inspect the abrasions, his nails lengthened without warning, black claws sliding free with a soft click. Arabella flinched. Instinct, fast and involuntary. He froze, stared at his own hand, and retracted the claws at once. The effort made his shoulders tense, but he did not look offended. He looked ashamed. I am sorry. She swallowed. You did not touch me with them. I still made you fear me. Silence stretched, full of things neither knew how to name. At last he leaned forward until his forehead rested lightly against hers, the contact warm and startlingly human. No claim pressure, no dominance, just shared breath. I will never take what you do not freely give, he said, each word distinct. Not your body, not your trust, not your name. If this bond is real, It survives consent, or it deserves to die. Her chest tightened for an entirely different reason. She turned her head slightly and saw, this close, the white seam of the scar cutting down his throat and disappearing under his collar. Older than she had guessed. Deeper. "You said you refused chains dressed as destiny," she murmured. "Is that where this came from?" He sat back, gaze dropping to the basin. For several beats, he did not answer. "3 winters ago, the council tried to crown me under bloodright," he said finally. "Not because I wanted rule, because they wanted a weapon with legal teeth. The rite requires submission oaths, witnessed and binding. I refused on the stone." Arabella pictured it with healer clarity. Ritual knives, elders chanting, rank pressing in from every side. They cut you for refusal. They tried to force the vow by pain response. His mouth flattened. They learned I can bleed without kneeling. And prophecy named you traitor. Prophecy named me useful. Council translated the rest. He finished wrapping her palm, tied the knot, and set her hand back in her lap as if returning something borrowed. "Now you understand the restraint. A bond can be weaponized by clever men. I do not hand anyone that blade." A knock struck the armory door. The tall sentry from the gate stepped inside, eyes flicking once to Arabella and Theron's cloak and then away, respectful. "Alpha, Moonhall delegation at Outer Hall, council seal and demand writ. They request immediate transfer of the exile." Theron rose in one fluid motion, all gentleness sheathed behind command. "Request denied. They brought treaty witnesses. Then they can witness my refusal." The sentry hesitated. "There is more. Border elders from Greyfen arrived after dawn bell. They invoke emergency tribunal rights under truce code. They want proceedings in the lower courtyard now." Theron's expression went still. "Of course they do." He turned to Arabella. "Can you stand?" She tested her legs. Unsteady, but holding. "Yes." "You come beside me, not behind. Even if they call for chains?" His gaze sharpened. "Especially then." By first light, the lower courtyard had filled with wolves from 3 territories, cloaks dark with mist, rank insignia gleaming at throats and cuffs like small declarations of power. The tribunal ring stood at the center, marked in chalk and moon ash, a circle meant to symbolize impartial law and usually used to stage predetermined outcomes. Arabella recognized 2 Moonhall elders near the front, both faces carved into ceremonial grief. Fenris was not among them. That absence felt deliberate. A clerk read charges in a carrying voice: poisoning, negligence, oath breach, ritual contamination, suspected moon treachery. The list was so comprehensive it bordered on parody. Around the ring, murmurs thickened. When Arabella stepped forward, a Greyfen enforcer moved in with silver thread restraints and a strip of gag cloth. "Protocol for accused contamination cases," he said. "Hands bound, speech through appointed speaker." "I am the appointed speaker," Arabella said. "Not anymore." He reached for her wrist. Theron stepped between them. The motion was not dramatic. One stride, one shift of shoulders, and the line of authority in the entire courtyard redrew itself. Power rolled off him in a controlled pulse, old alpha dominance tempered by hard discipline. Several lower-ranked wolves dropped their eyes on reflex. "She speaks under her own oath," Theron said. "Unbound." Greyfen's lead elder lifted his chin. "Ashford territory does not supersede treaty contamination law." Theron did not look at him. "Ancient Protector's right does." The elder's mouth tightened. "That right applies to mates and bloodkin." A beat of silence. Theron's voice dropped half a register. "Then record this clearly. I invoke it." The clerk's stylus paused mid-air. Moonhall's senior enforcer, a broad-shouldered male with council iron on his collar, gave Arabella a contemptuous once-over. "You would risk your standing for this womb killer?" The word hit the crowd like flint to dry grass. Theron turned his head very slowly toward the speaker, and when he did, the predator surfaced plain in his face, pupils narrowing, canines lengthening just enough to make the threat unmistakable. "Any hand raised against my healer," he said, "answers to my blade first." No one moved. Even the mist seemed to hold still above the stones. The enforcer tried to recover with a brittle smile. "Possessive language does not erase evidence." "Good," Arabella said, stepping to Theron's shoulder. Her voice trembled once, then steadied. "Then let us discuss evidence instead of insults." The clerk looked to the elders, received no rescue, and nodded for her to proceed. She gave them timeline, dosage patterns, storage key access, and contamination pathways with the clipped precision of someone who had written too many mortality reports to waste words. She described the snapped fever leaf tag, the residue inconsistency, the bitter metal scent profile that marked tinctured wolfsbane rather than dry root. Twice elders interrupted. Twice Theron cut them off with a glance that carried more force than shouting. When she finished, Greyfen's elder spread his hands. "Sophisticated lies are still lies. Your motive stands. The Luna trusted you and lost her child." Arabella felt the old shame surge, hot and poisonous. Theron spoke before she could fold into it. "Motive without mechanism is theater. You want conviction before inquiry, because inquiry might implicate someone with rank." The accusation landed exactly where intended. Moonhall's delegation bristled. A younger council runner pushed through the crowd then, breathless, clutching a sealed packet. "Message from Moonhall Infirmary Archives," he blurted. "Requested by Ashford Command at dawn." Theron took the packet, broke the seal, scanned the top sheet, then handed it to Arabella. Inventory log. Toxics room. Wolfsbane vial signed out 2 days before the miscarriage under emergency authority. Signature line scratched unreadable, but the authorization mark beside it belonged to council oversight, not healer staff. A quiet ripple moved through the ring. Greyfen's elder frowned. "This proves only that Wolfsbane was accessed." Arabella lifted the sheet so all could see. "It proves I told the truth about key control. It proves someone above healer rank touched poison before the loss." Moonhall's senior enforcer took one step forward, anger overtaking caution. "You think paperwork saves you?" Theron's hand went to the hilt at his hip. "Not drawn. Not needed." The enforcer stopped. The tribunal did not end in exoneration, not yet. Politics moved slower than fear. But the elders could no longer justify immediate transfer or execution while procedural conflicts stood open in front of witnesses. After a sharp, whispered conference, Greyfen announced a temporary ruling. Arabella remained under Ashford protection pending full treaty inquiry at Border Stones in 3 nights. It was a compromise designed to save faces. It was also survival. As the crowd began to break, Theron turned to her, voice pitched for her alone. "You did well. I nearly shook apart halfway through. You stood anyway." She looked down at his cloak still around her shoulders, at the dried salve on her hands, at the tribunal ring where no one had gagged her. The knot behind her ribs loosened by a fraction she could feel. When she met his gaze this time, she did not step back. Theron held her gaze for one suspended beat longer, then shifted his body half a step so he stood between her and the last knot of Moonhall wolves still lingering at the tribunal ring. It was not theatrical. It was tactical, instinctive, and so practiced it made clear how long he had expected betrayal to arrive in formal clothing. A voice cut across the courtyard from the upper stairs. "Alpha!" The tall sentry from the gate descended with a sealed tube in one hand and a torn strip of cloak in the other, her mouth set in a hard line. "Intercepted at the North Postern, Greyfen Courier. Wrong route. No escort token." He ran when challenged. Theron took the tube. Arabella caught the scent before the seal broke. Resin. iron ink, and beneath it a bitter metal note that sent a cold ripple through her shoulders. The same chemical sting she had smelled in the infirmary cloth. Fresh, not archival. He slid the message free and read in silence. Whatever he saw carved the warmth from his expression. "Read," he said, passing it to her. The script was efficient and unadorned, written by someone who assumed obedience and did not need to perform authority. Delay full inquiry, sustain contamination narrative through border session, push Ashford to protect her claim in public, parley at Standing Stones tomorrow night under truce banners, present cure draft. He will drink to shield her. When bond destabilizes, challenge law activates. No name signed, only a pressed seal. Windrider hawk over a crescent blade. Arabella's pulse thudded in her throat. He planned the tribunal outcome before we opened our mouths. Theron's voice stayed level with visible effort. He planned me. Around them, the remaining elders tried to look occupied while listening. Arabella folded the message once and handed it back. If this is authentic, Fenris is not trying to clear the Luna's miscarriage. He is building legal theater. He needs you to choose me in front of witnesses. Then he needs you weakened under truce code so he can call it lawful succession. And frame it as noble necessity, Theron said. Remove unstable Ashford, contain contaminated healer, consolidate command under the only male who appeared calm through crisis. The sentry on the stairs bared her teeth. Give me 10 runners and I bring him to you in chains tonight. No, Theron said at once. He wants a border breach he can name aggression. We do not hand him war banners. Arabella looked at the torn cloak strip in the sentry's fist. Gray wool, council issue. Burn mark at one edge, as if a wax seal had been melted in haste. A distinctive stitch pattern crossed the hem, 3 black bars over 1 white. She had seen that mark before, on the cuff of Moonhall's senior enforcer. She turned the cloth between her fingers. This came from the wolf who tried to bind me. He is running courier work for Fenris now. That means Moonhall Council is split or purchased, and evidence in their infirmary will not survive another night unless someone already copied it. Theron's head angled toward her with that same sharp, assessing attention he brought to maps and battle lines. Can you list exactly what must be secured and in what order? Yes. Then come. He did not touch her as they crossed the inner yard, but the awareness of him tracked every step, a live wire stretched between restraint and hunger. Wolves moved around them with clipped urgency. Doors opened before Theron reached them and shut fast behind. In the strategy room above the armory, he spread blank parchment across a long table and slid charcoal to her. Talk, he said. Arabella wrote while speaking, voice quick with healer precision. Toxic's room key ledger, original not copy. T-service records from Luna's chamber, especially who entered between 2nd and 4th bell. Laundry ash bins from infirmary, because Wolfsbane tincture leaves a pale yellow crust when burned with lye. Midwife hand notes if any survived. Also cup glaze scrapings from the Luna's bedside set. Tincture oils cling to unsealed ceramic longer than to cloth. Theron called 3 names to the doorway. Riven, Maella, Sorn. Silent retrieval only. No heroics. You are gathering records, not starting a border war. He looked back to Arabella. Anything else? She hesitated, then added. The fever leaf tag string from my satchel. Twine twist was left-handed when I tie right-handed. It is small, but small details survive when memories do not. A faint, grim approval crossed his face. That detail may save lives. The room emptied in a rush of boots and steel. For the first time since the courtyard, quiet settled. Charcoal dust blackened Arabella's fingertips. She realized she was swaying and put both hands on the table to steady herself. Theron watched the movement and exhaled slowly. Sit, before you drop again. I do not want to lose momentum. You will lose consciousness instead. She sat. For a few breaths neither spoke. Wind struck the tower slits, low and continuous. Fire snapped in the brazier. The bond between them had changed since the tribunal, less like a sudden pull and more like a tide that kept returning even when pushed back, patient and relentless. I can feel him at the edge of every thought, not as command, as presence. Dangerous, because presence can become dependency if I let relief masquerade as trust. I want to lean into this, and I am frightened by how much I want it. I want his hand at the back of my neck when the tremors start. I want his certainty when the room tilts. I want the part of me that has lived in apology to stop apologizing. But wanting is not strategy, and strategy is what keeps me alive. Breathe. Separate need from proof. Remember what was done to your name. Remember that men who offer shelter can still bargain with your future. Remember, and still look at him honestly. Theron broke the silence first. You are thinking loud enough to shake the table. Her mouth curved despite herself. That is a dramatic claim. It is accurate. He moved around the table and crouched in front of her. Same deliberate choice as in the armory, lowering himself so she did not have to tilt her head back to meet him. I need one answer before we walk into whatever Fenris built for tomorrow. Did you poison the Luna? The directness hit like cold water. No softness. No ritual phrasing. No, Arabella said. I treated hemorrhage after it began. I failed to save her child. I did not cause the loss. He held her gaze for a long moment, reading for fracture points, then nodded once. That is enough for me. It should not be. It is where I start. Proof is where I finish. By dusk, rain had returned in narrow silver lines across the fortress yard, and the first retrieval team came back mud-splattered and furious. Mela laid 3 wrapped bundles on the table, copied Toxic's ledger pages, a half-burned laundry manifest, and a broken cup saucer sealed in wax cloth. Moonhall Records' room had already been purged, she said. Fresh ash in the brazier. We salvaged what they missed. Lost one tail at the river cut. No blood, no capture. Arabella unwrapped the saucer and lifted it to her nose. Bitterness, metallic resin, then the faint ghost of honey tea. She closed her eyes, sorting notes the way she had been trained to sort pulse rhythms. This is not dry wolfsbane powder. It is tincture suspended in spirit and bitterroot. Slow bloom formulation. Symptoms build over hours, then cascade. Theron rested both hands on the table edge. Could the Luna have taken it by accident? Not in this concentration. Someone measured for delayed crisis. Mela swore softly. Fenris. Theron's jaw tightened. Not yet proven. Arabella set the saucer down with careful fingers. Proven enough to predict his next move. A second runner arrived near midnight with a formal summons bound in truce cord, witnessed by 2 neutral scribes and stamped with Windrider seal. Theron read it aloud so the room heard every legal hook. Parley at Standing Stones. Moonrise. Purpose: presentation of neutralizing cure for alleged contamination and bond corruption risk. Terms: both parties with 6 escorts. No drawn steel. Supplemental challenge clause: if cure accepted and administered, standing dispute over protector's right may be settled by sanctioned combat at dawn. Sorn spat on the floorboards. He is baiting you into poison before challenge. Theron did not deny it. If I refuse parley, he claims I fear inquiry. If I refuse cure, he says I hide rot in my house. If I attend and drink, he chooses timing and dosage. All eyes shifted to Arabella. Pressure gathered behind her ribs, heavy and precise. Then we attend and deny him control of sequence. We test before ingestion. He will call that insult, Mila said. Let him, Arabella replied. Insult is survivable. Poison is not. Theron studied her face as if memorizing it against an unknown future. You are asking to stand in his kill zone. I am done being moved around like a problem to contain. No one argued after that. They left for the standing stones under a moon muffled by cloud, hooves and boots muted on wet ground. Arabella rode beside Theron at the front, wrapped in a dark wool and carrying a healer's satchel rebuilt from fortress stores. The border plain opened ahead in slate and silver, ancient monoliths rising from the earth like broken teeth. Fenris waited between two truce banners, immaculate in treaty gray, expression composed into public concern. 6 escorts stood behind him in ceremonial spacing, hands visible, weapons peace-bound with red cord. He looked every inch the statesman forced into unpleasant duty. "Theron," he called as they dismounted. "You came. Good. We can end this contamination panic tonight." His gaze moved to Arabella with polished regret. "Healer Ravencrest, I wish we met under kinder terms." Arabella said nothing. The bond at her sternum tightened, warning and heat braided together. A neutral scribe stepped forward, recited parley terms, then presented a small crystal vial on a black tray. Pale liquid caught moonlight with a faint yellow sheen. Fenris spread his hands. A concentrated neutralizing draft, rare, costly, difficult to prepare. I commissioned it to protect all parties from bond decay linked to Wolfsbane exposure. Theron drinks first as protector. Then we proceed to challenge with clean standing. Theron reached for the vial. Arabella moved faster, catching his wrist before glass touched his palm. The contact slammed through her, bright and fierce, but she held on. "Wait." Fenris tilted his head, almost sympathetic. "Fear is understandable, healer. The draft is unpleasant but effective." She took one step closer to the tray and inhaled. Bitterroot, spirit, and beneath it the same metallic sting from the infirmary cloth and Moonhall saucer, but denser, sharpened, predatory in its concentration. Her voice came out low and steady. "This is Wolfsbane concentrate." A murmur broke across both escort lines. Fenris did not blink. "That is a serious accusation." "It is a correct one." He smiled then, small and cold, dropping the last mask by a fraction. "You were always clever. That was the first problem." Truce rules held everyone in place for one suspended breath, law and instinct colliding in the wet night air. Then Fenris flicked his fingers, and one of his escorts kicked over the brazier at the edge of the stones. Powder flared in a yellow-white burst. Wolfsbane smoke rolled low across the ground fast as floodwater. Theron shoved Arabella behind him as wolves coughed and staggered. Across the haze, Fenris's voice carried clear and triumphant. "Drink now and live weak, Ashford, or refuse, and watch her choke on what your protection bought." Arabella's lungs burned on the first breath of tainted smoke, and the standing stones seemed to tilt as the world narrowed to fire, metal, and Theron's grip locking around her arm while the trap snapped fully shut. The Wolfsbane haze moved like a living thing, hugging the ground, curling around boots and banners, turning every inhale into a knife-edge sting. Wolves on both sides coughed and stumbled backward, truce lines dissolving into raw survival. One neutral scribe dropped to his knees, retching into wet grass. Another tore her sleeve and pressed it over her mouth, eyes wild. Theron hauled Arabella behind the nearest monolith and ripped a strip from his cloak, tying it over her nose and mouth with quick, angry hands. "Slow breaths," he ordered. "Through cloth. Stay above the low drift." Across the clearing, Fenris stood upwind beside the overturned brazier, untouched by the worst of it. Treaty gray, still immaculate. He had planned wind direction, stone placement, panic vectors. Even now he looked composed, as if chairing a council debate instead of poisoning a peace parley. "Witnesses," Fenris called, voice amplified by the stones. "Record that Ashford brought contamination into truce grounds and now refuses neutral treatment. Record his instability. Record her collapse. I am not collapsing, Arabella rasped, though her knees threatened mutiny. Theron bared his teeth toward Fenris, then pivoted to his own wolves. High ground, north edge. No one shifts unless I command it. Keep the scribes breathing. A Windrider escort lunged through smoke with a peace-bound spear used like a staff, aiming for Theron's spine. Theron twisted, caught the shaft, and drove his shoulder into the attacker's chest hard enough to send him sliding in mud. Red truce cords snapped from the impact. So much for ceremony. Fenris lifted one hand, almost bored. Two more escorts moved, not for Theron this time, but for Arabella, as if grabbing her alive mattered more than winning a clean fight. Theron stepped into their path with blade drawn in one smooth motion, steel ringing once, twice, forcing them back without killing blows. He fought like a wall that had learned to move. Arabella pressed one palm to the stone, grounding herself through dizziness. The smoke carried layers now that panic had sharpened her senses. Raw wolfsbane, lamp oil, bitterroot spirit, and the same metallic tincture note that had shadowed every lie since Moonhall. Fenris had not improvised this. He had rehearsed it. The neutral scribe who had stayed on her feet staggered toward the center and shouted, "Truce is broken. By law, all actions now fall under emergency adjudication at witness discretion." Fenris's smile thinned. "Excellent. Then witness this. I still offer cure." He lifted the crystal vial from the black tray and held it high. If Ashford refuses a lawful antidote, any bond claim linked to this contamination is void under treaty code. He loses protector standing at dawn. That was the hinge. Not merely poison, legal erasure. Theron's voice dropped low enough that only Arabella heard. "We withdraw. I can fight him at dawn without drinking his draft." "He does not need you to drink all of it," she said, coughing hard against the cloth. "He needs the record that you accepted his terms. One swallow and he controls the narrative." Another wave of haze rolled around the stones. Her vision tunneled at the edges. Old exposure made her body react faster than others. The tremor in her forearms turned sharp and rhythmic. Peril was no longer abstract. She had minutes before control started to fray. Fenris saw it and aimed his next words at her like a dart. "Healer Ravencrest, tell him to drink. Unless your concern was never his safety, only your status." Theron moved as if to charge him then, fury cracking through discipline. Arabella caught his wrist. "No!" His amber gaze snapped to hers, fierce and disbelieving. "He is killing you. He built this around you. I can break it." Rain thickened, hissing where embers from the brazier died in the grass. By the time the moon edged free of cloud, the first violent scramble had narrowed into a tense ring of wolves holding distance, coughing, watching, waiting for one side to define the law of this moment. Fenris counted on fear and speed. Arabella understood she had to give them procedure and proof faster than panic could rewrite truth. She stepped out from behind the monolith. Theron swore softly and moved with her, not in front. Fenris tipped his head. "A brave decision. Kneel, drink, and perhaps you survive." Arabella pulled the cloth from her mouth. "I am done kneeling for men who poison women and call it governance." She held out her hand. "Give me the vial." A murmur rippled across the clearing. Fenris hesitated. Then, calculating spectacle, he tossed it toward her. She caught the glass against a sharp flare of pain in her cut palm. Theron's hand hovered near her shoulder. "Arabella, do not. I can taste metal in every breath. My hands are shaking, and he can see it, and Fenris can see it, and all these wolves can see the body they called weak, refusing to fall where they placed her. I am terrified. I am not confused. I know tinctures the way warriors know blade balance. I know how little it takes to prove composition if your tongue survives the test. This is the crux. If I wait for rescue, he keeps authorship of what happened tonight. If I act, I bleed for it, and the record belongs to me. I choose the second path. I choose it with my whole frightened heart. Let them watch. Let them remember who named the poison out loud. She uncorked the vial, wet one fingertip, and touched a measured drop to her tongue. The taste hit like hammered iron and dead flowers. Numbness flashed across her gums. Her stomach lurched but held. She spat into the mud and raised the vial for all to see. Concentrated wolfsbane in bitterroot spirit. No neutralizing binder. No moon salt. No milk thistle base. This is not cure. This is execution dressed in legal language. Fenris laughed once, brittle. A contaminated healer tasting poison proves only desperation. Then we escalate to old proof. Arabella dropped to one knee beside the fallen brazier, yanked her satchel open, and pulled out moonwater, ghost moss, and a narrow ritual blade. Theron crouched with her, shielding her from any sudden rush, eyes never leaving Fenris. "Tell me what you need," he said. 30 heartbeats. "Keep him off me." She sliced her forearm in a clean line, hissed through the pain, and let blood thread into a shallow iron dish. Moonwater followed, then crushed ghost moss, then 3 drops from Fenris's vial. The mixture hissed silver blue in the rain. Old runes etched on the dish rim brightened, recognizing healer bloodline authority that Moonhall had tried to strip. Several elders in the ring recoiled. One Grayfen wolf whispered, "Forbidden diagnostic rite." "Restricted," Arabella corrected without looking up. "Not forbidden to licensed old blood." She spoke the invocation in a steady cadence that carried over rain and coughs. The air tightened, then folded inward. Scent became image. It did not project like a painted illusion. It struck as shared memory through the oldest wolf senses. Taste of cedar tea, scrape of ceramic cup, Fenris's gloved hand tipping a clear tincture into the Luna's drink, while attendants argued at the far doorway. His thumb smearing residue along Arabella's satchel strap later, precise and practiced. His voice murmuring to Moonhall's enforcer in a shadowed corridor. "Timing is everything." Gasps tore through the crowd as witnesses reeled under the forced memory stream. One of Fenris's own escorts staggered and dropped his spear. Fenris's composure finally cracked. "Stop her!" He lunged. Arabella had expected that. With her free hand, she snapped a runed chain from her satchel and whipped it low. The links caught Fenris's wrist mid-stride. She slammed the chain's anchor ring against the standing stone and shouted the binding words, each syllable a strike. "By blood recalled, by witness held, by healer's law unbroken, I bind the treacherous hand to truth." Light flared along the chain. Fenris hit the end of it hard, jerked backward, and snarled as runes burned bright against his skin. For one suspended second, the clearing went silent, except for rain. Then Fenris shifted half-wolf with a violent shudder, shoulders broadening, claws punching through skin at his hands, face warping feral. He ripped once, twice, tearing stone chips free. On the third wrench, he gained half a step and slashed across Arabella's side. Pain tore hot and immediate through wool and flesh. She stumbled, hand clamped to her ribs, blood slicking her fingers. Theron reached Fenris in the same breath. The fight exploded at close range, claw raking Theron's forearm, Theron driving a knee into Fenris's ribs, steel flashing as Fenris seized a dropped blade, and Theron locked it at the hilt, muscles trembling with strain. They crashed into a monolith, rebounded, and tore through wet grass toward the toppled brazier. Wolves circled but did not interfere, caught between shock and law. Fenris spat blood and rainwater, voice ragged. "You were supposed to be the easiest piece to break." Arabella, breathing hard through pain, tightened the healer chain with both hands. "And knowledge for obedience." The chain cinched. Fenris faltered just long enough. Theron pivoted behind him, hooked an arm across his chest, and drove him backward into the Wolfsbane slick brazier frame with a metallic crash. Fenris howled and dropped the blade. Theron kicked it away, forced him to his knees, and planted a boot between his shoulders. "You mistook mercy for weakness," Theron said, voice like stone. Arabella straightened despite the fire in her side and raised her blood-marked hand to the witnesses. "I, Arabella Ravencrest, healer of old blood, file formal charge of moon treachery, poison conspiracy, and perversion of truce law. Witnessed by neutral scribes and sent memory right." The standing stones gave the faint hum that signaled legal attestation. Fenris thrashed once more, trying to reach Theron's throat with a clawed hand still bearing his alpha claim mark. Theron caught that wrist, pinned it to the brazier edge, and with one brutal, precise strike of his short blade severed the marked hand at the joint. The act was swift, controlled, final. Fenris screamed, then sagged, authority broken in the oldest way their law recognized. No one called foul. A Grayfen elder stepped forward, face white with fury and fear. "By witness treachery and confessed intent, Fenris Windrider is stripped of command and remanded to lifetime confinement in Silver Wards. Effective now." Windrider escorts dropped to their knees one by one, eyes lowered. The neutral scribe with shaking fingers carved the ruling into wax slate as rain ran down her sleeves. Theron bound Fenris's remaining arm behind his back and handed him to two guards. Then he turned, saw the blood at Arabella's side, and crossed to her in 3 strides, anger gone, terror naked and unguarded. She was still standing. When he reached for her, he paused just long enough to ask, raw and reverent, "May I?" Arabella nodded, and he gathered her carefully against him while the storm thinned, the smoke dispersed, and the law she had dragged into the light held. She felt him shaking only when her cheek pressed to his chest. Not fear of Fenris. Aftershock. Relief edged with rage. The bond between them, half-formed and straining, pulled hard enough to make her breath catch. A neutral scribe, still pale, stepped closer with wax slate in hand. "For the record," she said, voice uneven but formal. "Protector's right was invoked under disputed bond status. Treachery charges are resolved. Bond status remains to be declared." Theron did not look away from Arabella. "Then record this part clearly." Mila reached them with a field wrap and ghost moss pad. "You are bleeding through everything," she muttered to Arabella, pressing firm at her side. "Hold this." Her eyes flicked once to Theron, then softened. "If you are about to do what I think, do it standing. I can keep her upright for a minute." Arabella braced, hissed at the pressure, and nodded. Around the standing stones, wolves formed a rough ring again, this time not for judgment but witness. Rain mist silvered fur and hair. Fenris, bound and half-conscious, was dragged to the outer edge under guard, forced to hear. Theron stepped back just far enough to give her space, then dropped to one knee in mud and moonlight. The motion silenced even the coughing. "Arabella Ravencrest," he said, every word carrying. "I ask before witnesses and law, do you choose me as mate, with no coercion, no debt, and no counsel claim over your will?" The old fear flared anyway, the memory of Moonhall's corridor, spit and silence and torn skin at her throat. Then she looked at him and saw the same male who had sat on cold stone and counted her breaths, who had asked before touching a wound, who had stood beside rather than in front when she chose danger. A wall she had not known she had built began to crumble. She took his face in both blood-stained hands. "I choose," she said. "On my name, not theirs." Heat pulsed beneath her skin, answering. The bond thread brightened between them like drawn gold wire. Theron rose, waited one final heartbeat, and asked so quietly only she heard, "May I mark you?" "Yes." He turned her gently, one hand at her jaw, one at her shoulder, and lowered his mouth to the junction of neck and shoulder where pulse beat hard. The first touch of teeth was sharp enough to make her grip his wrist. Then the bite sank, deep and deliberate, pain flaring white and immediate, and changing. The agony did not vanish. It transformed, unfolding into a rushing warmth that poured down her spine and into her chest, into her injured side, into the trembling places that had held panic for days. She heard herself make a broken sound and felt him hold steady, not taking more than she gave. Gold arcs cracked outward from the mark, visible in the damp air, running over their skin like living script. Wolves in the ring gasped and bowed their heads. Through the bond came him. Cedar smoke, iron discipline, old grief hidden under command, the vow he had spoken with his forehead to hers. I will never take what you do not freely give. He lifted his head. Blood and rain mixed at his mouth. His eyes burned amber, feral and reverent. Mine, he whispered. Arabella turned in his arms before the crowd could make her into a symbol and not a person. She slid her hand to the back of his neck, found the old prophecy scar crossing his shoulder, and bared her own teeth. Stand beside me, she whispered, the words from the clearing now remade. Always. Then she bit him over the scar. His breath tore out in a harsh, shocked exhale as her mark took. She felt the resistance in him break not as surrender but as trust chosen in real time. The bond slammed fully into place, a two-way flood. Her healer precision, her stubborn mercy, the relentless will that had dragged poison into evidence, his protective force, his battle focus, the tenderness he guarded like a secret weapon. Their heartbeats staggered, caught, and aligned. Yours, he said against her hair. Mate, she answered, and this time the word felt like architecture, not chain. The gold light around them steadied, no longer wild. It settled into a low radiance at their marks and along their joined hands. The Wolfsbane smoke that still lingered at ground level thinned further, carried off by shifting wind. Several elders sank fully to one knee, acknowledging what law could no longer contest. Myla cleared her throat, suspiciously wet-eyed. Romance noted. She still needs stitches. A short, ragged laugh escaped Arabella, the first unguarded one in what felt like another lifetime. Theron pressed his forehead to hers once more, then let Myela guide them toward the healer cart while scribes sealed evidence bundles under triple witness: Fenris's vial, the brazier powder, the iron diagnostic dish, the runed chain, the salvaged saucer, the copied toxics ledger, and the half-burned laundry manifest. Sorn logged each item aloud, Riven countersigned, both neutral scribes stamped wax. Nothing vanished into convenient fire again. 3 days later, under clear moon and a hard wind, the full border assembly convened in the same clearing where Arabella had nearly been erased. Fenris stood inside silver wards, wrists bound, claim mark hand gone, and authority with it. He tried once to catch Arabella's eye with that polished pity he had worn in Moonhall. She gave him only a healer's clinical glance, then looked away. The Moonhall senior enforcer stood beside him in irons. The torn cloak hem and 3 black, 1 white stitch pattern matched. The left-handed twine knots on the planted fever leaf tag demonstrated in front of witnesses, and his courier route confirmed by postern logs. He confessed to carrying messages and tampering records. He claimed he never knew Fenris would dose the Luna. The Grey Fen elder recorded the statement and added flatly, "Your ignorance did not prevent the harm." The Luna's sister stepped forward last, grief carved deep but voice steady. "I wanted someone to blame quickly," she said to Arabella, not looking away. "I helped him by needing that. I was wrong. It did not heal everything. It was true, and truth finally had room to stand." Sentence was read before all packs. Fenris Windrider, Life confinement in silver wards at Cold Harbor Bastion. No visitors without tri-pack consent. Moon Hall enforcer. 20 years labor service under healer supervision. Barred from rank forever. Two council elders who signed the unreadable toxics authorization were stripped of office and exiled from medical law. Then came restoration. A new healer sigil, forged silver and obsidian, was pinned at Arabella's collar by the oldest neutral matron present. No tear of skin this time. The matron spoke so all could hear. Arabella Ravencrest is recognized as High Healer of Treaty Territories and Luna Consort to Theron Ashford, with independent authority over medical tribunal standards. Arabella stepped to the central stone and read the first reform herself. Her voice did not shake. No healer shall be condemned for contamination without verified chain of evidence, including scent memory or equivalent forensic right under neutral witness. She set down the decree tablet and added, quieter but still carrying, grief deserves truth, not a scapegoat. Theron accepted the alpha mantle in the same assembly, not crowned above her, but standing shoulder to shoulder as war chief bound by shared oath. When asked to declare hierarchy, he answered, beside. No one challenged it. At dusk, they walked the new sanctuary wing built against the inner fortress wall, stone still smelling of fresh mortar and pine beams. Mothers rested on padded cots near warm braziers. Two toddlers chased each other between benches, while an older pup sat with Riven learning herb names from illustrated cards. Sorn supervised the outer gate with 6 guards, and a softness in his posture he would deny if asked. Maella ran inventory with terrifying efficiency and stopped long enough to hand Arabella a cup of honey tea that had been tested twice in front of her. Drink, Maella said. I would like one peaceful evening before you rewrite another legal code. Arabella smiled and drank. Night deepened. They returned to the standing stones, now cleared and clean, where torches ringed the grass and pack representatives waited in respectful silence. Children sat at the front with blankets around their shoulders, safe, curious, unafraid. When Theron and Arabella stepped into the light, wolves bowed, one row after another, not to power alone, but to what had been remade. Names rose in the hush, formal and warm. Alpha Theron. Luna Consort Arabella. Then, from the old matron with the forge-scarred hands, the name that settled over everything else. Arabella Ravencrest, mate and maker of gentler law. Theron's fingers found hers, the bond a calm, living current between their marks. Above them, the moon cleared the last cloud, and in the clearing where she had once been named Poison, her name was spoken like home.